Yeah. So, good morning again, everyone. We are in the, let me just check something. Yep, that's okay. We are in the eighth week or eighth chapter of our 2020 Truth of Happiness Dhamma Study. I think this is our 18th class. And so this class is in that chapter called Understanding Not Self. And in it, I used the Paticca Sutta and the teachings on the five clinging aggregates to make that point, that this is understanding not self and self in relation to the world we live in is the essence of Dhamma practice. And the five clinging aggregates are the description that the Buddha uses to describe the ongoing personal experience of stress and suffering rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. The five clinging aggregates are dukkha. The five clinging aggregates are anatta. The five clinging aggregates are, in a sense, you could say they're karma, and we'll get into that a little deeper in next week's teaching. The those of you that read the Kanda Sutta that I included in the email, how many of you read that? No, you don't have to. That gets into something interesting in that sutta where the Buddha makes the distinction between the aggregates and the clinging aggregates. And of course, the aggregates themselves, form, feeling, perceptions, mental fabrications, and consciousness are completely impersonal and aren't phenomenally or naturally clinging together. They are as impersonal as the Buddha's description of a human being in the Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta that you remember. The Buddha describes each and every human being in this way. We made up of four elements: earth, wind, fire, and water. The fifth element of the space property, and the sixth property of consciousness. Again, ongoing thinking rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. That is the sum and substance of every human being, and every human being cannot be more or less than that. And it is that profound understanding of that that we create a dispassionate and impersonal view of ourselves in relation to the world. The five clinging aggregates, when seen in that dispassionate way, just as we see the six-propertied person, we see the five-propertied clinging aggregates. When we see them in a dispassionate, impersonal way, they're no longer clinging aggregates. And so they describe then the dispassionate, impersonal experience of having a human life, much like the Buddha teaches in teachings on anatta. Anatta does not mean there's no such thing as a self, or that we should strive to achieve a speculative existence in something called nothingness or emptiness. The Buddha just said, using that common term anatta, that the views we hold of a self are wrong views. Let go of those views. And the teachings on the five clinging aggregates reflect them. So I'm going to start about, for those of you that are reading along, about halfway through the chapter. I'm going to start with the sentence that says, "It is the stress of maintaining wrong views." And I probably won't read the whole chapter. I just want to make some important points. Most of us, in fact, I would say all of us, except maybe one of you. And if anybody has difficulty really applying this, send me an email and I'll get into it a little deeper, because this is really the key point. This was the focus of our 36-week class on true Vipassana, was resolved here at the five clinging aggregates. So I'm going to start reading there. It is the stress of maintaining wrong views, known as dukkha, that distracts from recognizing the mirage-like nature of these views. In other words, these views, once we form them, become the only view we have of ourselves in relation to the world. And so, of course, we have to tenaciously cling to them until we realize that they're fabricated, that we made these views up. They're not something that describe us in any way, and they can only contribute to our confusion, delusion, ongoing stress, and suffering. Let go of the views. But the views, because of the clinging nature of a mind rooted in ignorance, clings together a acceptable and presentable self to the deluded individual and to the world. In other words, we create this thing out of nothing, out of whole cloth, but it becomes us, and this is the us that we're holding out in front of the world. But the us has no real substance, and that's where the stress arises. And so we're constantly craving after and clinging to ways to maintain this fabricated self. And I hope that you're getting through my voice that tenaciousness, because that's how we live our lives, clinging to these fabricated views. And it creates all the stress and suffering in our lives. The worldly situation right now with COVID-19 is such a perfect description of that, isn't it? People that are taking this personal and seeing the sky falling because of it is just the example of that, of taking it personal. What's occurring in the world right now is nothing new. Maybe I should say it. It's not an accurate statement. It's nothing unique. It is new compared to most of our lifetimes, but it's not unique. As a consequence of having a human life, there is going to be stress and suffering, and this is simply one example of it. When we stop clinging to those notions of taking life personally, all of this falls away, and all of the effort that goes into clinging these aggregates together, maintaining these false views of self, simply falls away by doing Dhamma practice, by maintaining this in a clear and direct way. Let me continue. Through dependent origination, clinging to a view of self occurs. Keeping the self comfortable, safe, engaged, and most importantly, continually reestablished, then becomes the sole purpose for existence. And that might seem like a too extreme statement, but when you think about how human beings add up their lives, they do it in just that acquisitory way, meaning with some people it's wealth, with some people it's position, with some people it's associations. How many people I can consider my friends? That's a game most of us started in high school, didn't we? And we continue these things by describing ourselves by what we have acquired, and also, and even more damaging to our own well-being, we describe ourselves by the things that we're lacking. And that often falls into this self-loathing and this constant need to fix a broken self, which is the main reason for a lot of modern so-called spirituality, is to find out where we're broken and fix it, to find out how we lost our soul or how somebody might have stolen our soul. I spent many years studying with Michael Harner and Sandra Ingerman, and very respectable, sincere people, but all talking about how to retrieve a soul that I lost. And I believed it at the time. Now I understand there's no possible way to have a soul, so there's nothing to retrieve. What is important is to understand there's no such thing as a soul except the soul that's present right here and right now, meaning the human being or the soul of living. This is what's occurring. The aggregates are a description of life. The five clinging aggregates are a description of life rooted in ignorance. I'll continue. The Eightfold Path provides the framework and right view or right perspective for observing and interrupting dependent origination. So we learned from the Paticca Samuppada Sutta that from ignorance to 12 observable causative links, all manner of confusion, delusion, and ongoing human suffering arises. When we understand that it is from ignorance that as a requisite condition comes fabrications, and from that fabricated view, from that fabricated view rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, we now start creating this self. And again, you remember the Buddha went through that progression from that initial ignorance to fabrication, the fabrications feeding consciousness. I'm not going to go through each step, and how that consciousness creates a fabricated view because of ignorance when we come in contact with the world. And so at that point, no matter what we're doing, everything then becomes a reaffirmation of that ignorance, including for many, many people, their so-called spiritual, Buddhist, or philosophical practice, because it's rooted in ignorance. It's not rooted in the reality of Four Noble Truths. And again, this is experience, this whole, as the Buddha concludes in the Paticca Samuppada Sutta, he says this describes this whole mass of suffering. And another word for five clinging aggregates in the original Pali is khanda, or the Sanskrit skanda, Khanda, which can be translated to mean a heap, this whole heap of suffering. That's the reference to that word khanda, to the Pali word. It also means the trunk of a tree, and I might touch on that in a little bit, why that's significant. But the Buddha is describing a mind and a human being rooted in ignorance as a heap. but we can arise out of that heap with true understanding and true wisdom. Again, I'm making the point that it is within the heap, the khanda of the five clinging aggregates, that awakening arises. It's not by a rejection of what we are right now. Every Dhamma practitioner begins a successful Dhamma practice with beginning where they are, not where they hope to be. And that might seem a little obscure right now, but that's the problem with fabricated dharmas, because they don't provide the means for putting ourselves in our body right here and right now, right where we are in the present time. Meaning radical acceptance of the fact that right now, as a beginning Dhamma practitioner, my mind is rooted in ignorance. So let me develop through deep concentration, through jhana practice, and understanding what refined mindfulness really means, holding in mind the principles of an eightfold path, to take that five clinging aggregate person to a aggregate person, meaning a person that simply is made up of the common things of human life and is taking none of them personally. And in that way, nothing that occurs as we come in contact with the world, I'm referencing back to dependent origination, this mind is now rooted in wisdom and understanding. So there's no grasping after or clinging to fabricated views, because there's no fabricated views. That's an important point. It's by recognizing and abandoning fabricated views or any of the resulting actions that are motivated from that ignorance, meaning constant grasping and clinging or maintaining these fabricated views, that one is able to directly extricate themselves from those fabrications and directly unbind the five clinging aggregates. The Buddha describes awakening in very simple and very direct ways. I'm sorry, I left somebody out. Oh, it's the thing. I just let the thing. I hope you weren't waiting long. I just noticed you were in the waiting room, but I'm glad you joined us this morning. Where was it? So this experience of five clinging aggregates only seems real because of our own clinging, because we're doing, and as the dependent origination reference, that is our own clinging and maintaining to, because of identifying with the form, with our perceptions, with our fabrications, and our feelings, and our ongoing consciousness. Every thought that a mind rooted in ignorance has is a clinging thought. And it's a thought that generates more clinging. Why? Because I'm having the thought. And I think that I am all that it is. And if I don't maintain all that it is, there's going to be nothing to maintain. The Buddha recognizes that what we think the all is absolutely nothing. It's anatta. It's rooted in wrong views that force us as human beings to cling a fabricated existence known as five clinging aggregates and experience the ongoing stress and suffering of those aggregates. Dhamma practice has us reunite our mind and our bodies within the clinging aggregates, and through Dhamma practice in great gentleness with ourselves, great gentleness with our clinging aggregates, let them go. The most loving thing we can do for ourselves and for all other sentient beings is to take to the Dhamma and awaken. That's what I mean when I say that, because then we let go of all fabricated views that would cause us to be hurtful and aggressive in our interactions with other people. It's true salvation, even though the Buddha never taught salvation, because we're saving ourselves from our own wrong views. We're not relying on an outside agency to deliver this either, through merit or through bowing or chanting or anything else, or even the longevity of Dhamma practice. In other words, some Dhamma practice is given longevity simply because you've been doing it for so long, but not really doing anything. I spent 20 years in modern Buddhism wondering why I wasn't getting anywhere. Well, I wasn't getting anywhere because I wasn't on the vehicle that could carry me there, meaning the Eightfold Path. I was continuing to take everything personal and creating a personal Dhamma practice. And look at how modern Buddhism has devolved, that it's encouraged to take a little bit from this teaching, a little bit from that teacher, a little bit from that book, a little bit from that psychiatrist, a little bit from that, whatever it might be, and cobble that together and call it Buddhist practice. And that is encouraged. We're taught that Buddhist practice is really just a compilation of everything we think and want it to be. And so we developed this modern Buddhism by common agreement that simply reinforces these fabricated views. Again, I'm not beating up modern Buddhism. It makes the point of exactly what the Buddha went through, because he went through the same thing The same structure was in place during the Buddhist time as we have now. He studied with all the famous teachers, the foremost so-called spiritual teachers of his time, realized that they didn't teach anything that directed him back towards himself. It was all continued fabrication. It was all speculation. It was all about establishing the self in some other self. When the Buddha is referencing to self and something other than self, that's what he's referring to. He's not teaching that we should create a five clinging aggregate person in yet another realm, because this one stinks for us. He taught us to recognize the foolishness of doing any of that. He taught us to recognize the foolishness of thinking that we should create anything other or be anything other than a six property person who has these aggregates that manifest their life. And so I'm going to conclude with that. I know I'm not reading the whole chapter, but when you look at the five aggregates, the form aggregate, the feeling aggregate, the perception aggregate, the mental fabrication aggregate, and the consciousness, meaning ongoing thinking initially rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. When you look at those five aggregates clearly, you realize there's nothing personal about them except, and you can watch yourself in this process, except as you cling yourself to that. When you identify yourself as your form, you're clinging to the form aggregate. When you say at the end of a really bad day, and you're referencing to these feelings that you carried around with you all day, I had a bad day, or somebody asks you how you're feeling and you respond to that as that's a real question, you are taking your feelings personal. And those feelings now start feeding perceptions. The perceptions themselves are rooted in ignorance, and so we cling a view to that perception. And that perception then becomes a fabrication, which is a hardened construct of a perception. It's just a progression of a deeper establishment of that fabricated perception in the first place. And that's all supported when we cling to those thoughts that arise and are supported by the first four aggregates, now clinging to ongoing thinking rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. A mind that cannot distinguish itself from clinging aggregates or dispersonal aggregates. That's where the Dhamma is practiced. At the form, at a feeling, at our perceptions, at our mental fabrications, and bringing all of that together into our thinking in this present moment. And so if in this moment, and this relates directly to what we're going to touch on next week in Karma and Rebirth, if in this moment I'm holding in mind and still clinging to views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, I cannot possibly produce a moment rooted in wisdom. I cannot possibly produce a moment rooted in understanding or peace. It's not within me to do it. It's not within my thinking to do it. But as I start incline my mind, and let me just go back to that in that scenario. But I can create scenarios within that fabricated and ignorant view that makes me feel like I'm doing something. I'm fixing myself. But when I let go of the need to fix myself or find the next great secret about the universe, then I can just rest in who I am. And then I can get on with having a life. That's why I say that the Buddha teaches us how to actually have a human life, because we're no longer fabricating our life by clinging to things that aren't us, the five aggregates. That's today's talk. Thank you. I just want to reiterate again that when we're done with our class, I'll end the recording and keep the meeting room open. And I'll also remind you all that nobody has to say anything. If you feel like you'd rather just be quiet this morning, you could just pass. So I'm going to start with David, and I'm going to ask you to unmute your mic. I'll just call on you. So David, how are you this morning?
Good, John. Can you hear me?
I can.
One of the descriptions I heard a long time ago, and I read, of the aggregates, not just a heap, but a bundle, something that you would carry. And I always thought that the burden of carrying the aggregates, once you understand it, you could put that burden down. So
yeah,
again, so many visuals, the Fena Sutta that you had this week, and just others that, gently describe them with, drops of water and puffs of smoke and mirages, but also just, something to be, have revulsion for and to put it down. So it really is, it's just the more you dive into understanding just the importance of understanding the aggregates
Yeah.
really focuses what the practice is all about. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. That is it. The Dhamma resolves right here within these aggregates. So, Karen, how are you? Could you unmute your mic and say hello, please?
Yes, hello, everybody.
Hello.
Thank you, John, for being here and everyone else for being here.
For joining.
I love joining this class, but I'm going to listen because that's what I need to do right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Good morning, Laura. How are you?
Hi, I'm well.
Good. All the Branhams are doing good?
Yes, we're full of life over here. Yeah, the aggregates are just like fireworks in our house for myself. I think I'm constantly being faced with so many forms and feelings, and
Yeah.
just from the busyness of our household. But so yeah, this was a wonderful talk and a grounding reminder for my practice, to just kind of reframe my thinking a little bit. So I'm really grateful for that. And I'm also reminding myself of, kind of this tendency that I might have to go in the other direction, and, then tell myself, okay, you're not clinging to any of these things, right? Like, you're just totally free and letting go of all these aggregates. But that kind of, through that, because I've gone through this before, through that, there's sort of this opposite effect of not necessarily living through the moments in kind of a authentic way, for lack of better words. So yeah, it's just, oh goodness, life's a journey, and there's a lot of work to be done. And I think when things, when the carpet gets pulled out from under you, I sort of, see that how much work there really is. I mean, it's been easy for me to kind of dig into what my routine and rhythm has been, and my goals through my work these past few years, and really feel like this sense of security through that. And since that's totally gone, I'm able to really look at my practice and kind of get a sense of where I am with it. And yeah, so anyway, thank you. Thanks for the teaching, John.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks for joining us today. And you touch on the heart of the matter, that it is by understanding the five clinging aggregates that we can understand why we fabricate things and we attach ourselves to them. And that fabrication, as it's maintained, and we're losing the structure of our Dhamma practice, it's just going to fall away. But it's always here. It's always present. The Dhamma has, when the Buddha's talking about a timeless path, he's not talking about developing an eternal life. He's talking about that four noble truths are timeless. They're always true. That's why we call them timeless truths. And they're truths that relate to the Dhamma. That's another reason why they're noble. So thank you, Laura. Who's next? Sarah. How are you, Sarah?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Glad you joined us. How's things up in Maine?
Things are
like they are here.
We're in lockdown here in Maine. I mean, we're all supposed to stay in our houses if we're not essential personnel. But this is just really resonating with me, and I guess I'm looking at peace differently than I have ever looked at it before. And I notice throughout my week exactly and precisely the things that the choices that I've made, or the thoughts that I have entertained, or the feelings that I've entertained, or the paradigms that I've entertained that have generated within myself and within my social context those stirrings of emotions and stirrings of I've been told before that I'm like a little tsunami, or a whirlwind, or a storm, you know, and that somehow I'm peaceful in the middle. But the truth is, I wasn't peaceful in the middle. But what I'm feeling as I'm meditating more is, I thought peace was like a quietness, like a stillness, like a calm. But what I'm experiencing is this space, this, that's just how I would describe it, is a space where there's not all of that commotion going on. There's not that turmoil that I'm generating, or somebody feeling uncomfortable because of something that I'm doing or saying. And inside of myself, there's just this incredible space. And I'm enjoying that, and I'm enjoying the awareness of those 5 clinging aggregates, and that if I'm experiencing that suffering or causing it in somebody else, that I don't have to stay there. I can remove myself from that paradigm. I can remove myself from that sense of belonging to or attachment to a particular organization or group or people or but that's a lot. I'm sorry, but
No, you're making some just important points, Sarah. It is because of clinging, we cling to people and events that and we create associations, and that's simply another influence on our lives when we're clinging to those, because then we want to be like everyone else. That's an aspect of a mind rooted in ignorance, that it wants self-reference wherever it can find it, and the most convenient way and the most powerful way is through our other human associations, and we see that all the time, don't we? That we can. I don't want to get too sidetracked, but we see nations that are convinced by certain leaders that will do things that they wouldn't normally do. And again, I don't want to get too deep into it, but that's an extreme example of how we do that. But through maintaining a 5 clinging aggregate person, we have to cling to everything else around us. And that starts, it doesn't start, it maintains delusion, and it keeps us away from Dhamma practice. So, thank you, Sarah.
yes.
Who is that? I can't see. You're moving around a little bit. This thing is moving around. Brett, how are you? You could unmute your mic, Brett. There you are.
Thank you for the teaching. It's really prevalent in my life and right now, and it's still hard for me to see the views and not take things personally and attach to things. And but it was good to hear it, and it's what I needed to hear. So thank you, and that's hello to everybody.
Thanks, Brett. Good to see you this morning. Tim, how are you?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. So I'll be, honest, like I always am with the sangha. My mind is definitely is a little agitated. So meditation's been kind of difficult, although I keep meditating. Thank you very much for the teaching. I just wanted to mention something, and again, it's in the book, and it's on page 231, on the last sentence. All experiences are dependent on contact, and contact is dependent on ignorance. And that brings me straight to something that you had talked about before, and we've all mentioned here before, when we start talking about the ego, anatta. It is the ego self that has no substantial nature. Developing understanding of what is perceived to be an ego self is paramount, so that all attempts at continuing to establish anatta are abandoned. And that I think in these times, it's really easy for us to have all these agitations and feelings and these aggregates pop up, because the ego is definitely challenged here. Our existence is brought to the forefront, because Where, you know, we have this disease going around that could potentially kill us. So it's during normal life, we never think of that, but now we are. And so this is such a very proper teaching. And I think it's more about aversion than it is about clinging on this. It's almost like we're trying to avoid all these negative things when we can't stop this train from barreling down on us. It's coming. It's here and it's coming. And that's kind of what I'm getting from this. And it is difficult for, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that even though I understand it and this all makes sense, it's still very hard to accept. It's very hard to accept. But through the Dhamma and through practice and through what we've been taught about jhana meditation and following the Eightfold Path, we talk again, I'll say it again, I could do every week, that disenchantment followed by dispassion to reaction will allow us not to have that emotional response and that whole process that brings us to suffering. And so that's kind of where I am now with this very profound experience that we're all part of, not uniquely, but we're all part of. Even though it's an introspective practice, the Dhamma, we all right now are part of this ongoing thing that we're experiencing very differently, but also very similarly. So, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Were you referring to, when you said accept, you mean accept the reality of the Dhamma? Was that what you were referring to?
Well, and what, I don't know, I said a lot there, and I forgot when did I accept or accept? Did you say?
You were making reference to seeing views through ignorant eyes, or to accept this, and I think you meant accept the Dhamma.
Accepting the Dhamma.
Yes. Yes. As the reality for human life, and that is the point. When we understand who we are in relation to the world, there's nothing else to experience except common peace and appropriate responses to life. In other words, it would be foolish to say, well, I understand life, so let me go kiss someone I know has COVID-19. That's rooted in arrogance, isn't it? Yet people will go there. They'll take that too far. That's an extreme view. It still means, because I understand and I don't take things personally, doesn't mean that I shouldn't be cautious, but in a reasonable and understanding way. The Buddha said, he didn't say we're supernatural creatures, that once we awaken, we don't need anything and we can fly around the cosmos. He said every human being who practices the Dhamma, and others, need four things: food, clothing, shelter, and medicine. We don't become superhuman beings. We don't become non-human beings. We become human beings. That's what the Dhamma teaches us, and that's what you were describing. So thank you.
Can I just say one more thing, John?
Sure.
You know, I normally don't take a lot of time, so I do apologize to the song. I'll make it quick. From what you were just saying, this is exactly where this issue I'm having right now is. And so the name of your book is The Truth of Happiness. Okay. And again, I'm not trying to be an antagonist here, but I was thinking about this when reading about the Five Aggregates, and for me, it's more about tranquility and not happiness. Because
again, you could apply any label to it, and even as a title of a book, I could have been in numerous names or words for happiness, tranquility, awakening. But it just describes something that is related to the Dhamma, is that if we really want to be happy, we have to let go of views that make us unhappy. And so, and I know you're referring to, isn't happiness a self-centered view only to a self-centered person?
Right, John. And I wasn't exactly, because it's introspective, and I'm talking about me here, this anatta. I just want to, this is how I summarized it real quick, in 3 sentences. This is what I wrote. Reaction to impermanent phenomena feeds the ego. Through dispassion,
yep,
will alleviate reaction. Dispassion comes from disenchantment of the five aggregates. With discernment we're able to correctly apply the Dhamma. So for my introspective view, when I think of happiness, it becomes it becomes self-referential. But tranquility for me is a peace and calm, non-reactive mind.
Yeah.
That's I got it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Tim. It's beautiful. Thane, how are you? Nice to see you.
Yes, hello.
How are you?
Good. Yeah, this COVID-19 really threw me for a loop. That's the reason why you really haven't seen me. I had to reorganize my life a little bit.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you. And yeah, again, talking about the five aggregates, and especially for me, and it's something for you to kind of touch on. Clinging to objects is a little, at least to me, well, I don't know, everybody's different. A little easier to see. Clinging to views, like clinging to a worldview, like a worldview is you're so immersed in it that you don't even know that you are clinging to a view. It's like almost below the radar. For me, it's one of the most difficult things. Like the value judgment I have, for example, I had to go back to security. But I noticed that was the last resort because I have a value judgment of going back to security, being a security officer. And so it took me a long time to realize, and it took someone else to say, hey, why don't you go back to security? You have 15 years of security since you're having issues, finding occupation and with COVID-19 and so forth. And I just begrudgingly, because I had this value judgment on security, that I said, you know what, I'm gonna go back. And that whole thing was a great teaching moment for me, because the clinging that I had, or the clinging to the view or value judgment was so underneath the radar, it took some time to see it. So could you comment more about, the difficulty of being aware of a worldview and then being able to, address that?
Yeah, thank you, Thane. It's much easier and because it's much more obvious to let go of clinging to objects. My high school ring, as opposed to the worldview that you mentioned, because the worldview is really our fabricated view of reality. And so how can we let go of what we believe is our world? That's why the Dhamma practice often feels like annihilation. That's why we've created fabricated Dharmas as a substitute for the actual Dhamma work that has us address that issue. In other words, when we're rooted in that mindset, we will constantly create speculative and fabricated existences for ourselves, including the human existence is a speculated existence when it's rooted in ignorance. And because it's our confused and deluded minds that's doing that, we have to have a structure to recognize it. That's the brilliance of what Siddhartha Gautama awakened to. He awakened to the notion that it is ignorance that is the common human problem, not a lack of godly interventions or a lack of spiritual understanding. It's ignorance. And ignorance is rooted in the mind, isn't it? And it's ignorance that has us grasping after views rooted in ignorance. And so our worldview is an expression of that ignorance, isn't it? And if you want to see a good example of it, as the Buddha did in the Loka Sutta, look out on the world and you will see exactly what the Buddha saw 2,600 years ago. The world is a flame with what? The fires of passion, and it's passion clinging to fabricated views, to worldly views that continue this. The Buddha also taught, and often taught, that it's easier to recognize this through the body than it is through the mind. And it's because the mind is the vehicle that is engaged in ignorance, and it's an aspect of ignorance to ignore its own ignorance. And so we simply can't see it unless we're developing a right view from wrong view. That's the first aspect of the Eightfold Path, isn't it? Right view. It informs us immediately that the Eightfold Path is a path of going from wrong view to right view. And then we understand the question would be, if you don't know it, well, what wrong view? Wrong view of what? As we develop the Dhamma, we understand that it is a wrong view of self in relation to the world we live in. That's a very, very focused Dhamma that encompasses everything, doesn't it? Because everything is occurring right here and right now. So I hope I answered your question, but it really comes down to the last thing that we let go of is a wrong view. And when we finally let go of that wrong view, we're done. We are in that space. What's the wrong view? The wrong view is this is me. This is mine. This is what I am. That's what the Buddha means by anatta. That's why I keep saying everything resolves in the five clinging aggregates, in anatta, in the experience of karma, in a self-referential view. It is in that moment, stuck in worldly views that are the Buddha would describe that as a confining space, to recognize all the views. Even if they have some basis in physical reality, all of those views are fabricated because they began from a mind that didn't understand, but now it does. So does that help to think? Does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, it does. It does.
You asked such great questions. So, whether you're in the funk about COVID-19 or not, you have to be part of our classes. I'm glad you're here this morning. It's good to see you again. Who's there? Mary, how are you?
Hi, John. Hi, everybody.
It's good to see you. How are you doing?
Good. Good to see you.
Yeah.
This is a perfect sutta for what we're all experiencing.
Yeah.
But it is like anything else in life. It is what we make of it. And I spend a lot of time coaching people right now because of what people who work for me are going through and facing on the front lines of all of this.
Yeah.
And it is what you make of it. It is your view. Do you have a clear view? Do you have the right tools to do the job? It almost makes what's going on in the world no different than another more simple problem. It's all in how you view it. And it is the idea of the train coming on the train track, right? If you think that the train is coming on the train track directly at you, and you don't step aside and you don't do what you need to do to keep yourself safe, and you let your thoughts get the better of you of the fact that this train is coming, you allow the aggregates to cling, then you will experience fear. And and maybe I am oversimplifying it, but not to be insensitive, but that's when COVID-19 becomes just like anything else. That are we doing the right thing to keep ourselves safe, even if we work on the front lines in harm's way? What is our view? It's not personal. Are we addressing the fears, in our head, which are fabrications, which is very difficult because you run into an awful lot of people where the fear is, therefore I am, that joined with the fear. And that's, we understand why that happens. But there's, if we take what's going on today and make it as simple as some other things that go on in our life, we can be grateful for impermanence because we know that there's an end and another side. And that's even when, for those who have been impacted as a job or something like that, that will pass, that is impermanent.
Yeah.
So the clinging aggregates are just the crux of everything. It's probably one of the harder things for us to untangle, speaking for myself, and recognizing when you are putting all those aggregates together and creating your suffering. I mean, that's what it is. A clinging aggregate is the source of our suffering.
Yeah.
And to know that and understand that is one thing, but to really have such a keen awareness in every factor of our day is, much harder. And so I think this is a very good sutta, beautifully presented. I'm glad to be here with everyone. And just to everything you just said, I just feel like saying, yes, that's it. And so I thank you, John, and thank everybody. I hope everybody's doing well.
Yeah. Thank you, Mara. So glad you joined us today. I think that's Maura. Yes. How are you, Maura?
I am well,
Is that Suki with you? I can't quite see.
and I was Jiso,
Ah, okay. All right, Jesus.
another bodhisattva. We have all bodhisattvas in this house. Yeah, it's great to see everybody.
Good to see you.
Hi, Karen. Hi, Dathan, and everybody else. Yeah, it's a great. It's a very, I don't know that I have anything in particular to add. I've been reminding myself over and over that Dhamma is good in the beginning, the Dhamma is good in the middle, and the Dhamma is good in the end. It just is. It's always the answer. I think, needless to say, like everybody has said, these particular time really, Mary, I think one of, kind of touching on what you said, it's a very clear path. There's a very clear sense in the body of when I am taking myself to be this body and how all views form from that. So in this fathom long body, and John, I really loved when you said, and that space, because I'm always thinking of we're either, identified with dukkha, or we're in the space that's free of clinging to the dukkha. And it's moment to moment, it really is just moment to moment. And when this, when I can continue to be sensitive to what's arising in this body, it really just is a roadmap to Third Noble Truth and Fourth Noble Truth. So,
good way to put it.
And yeah, so like everyone, there's a lot going on. I have I have a number of friends that are deeply on the front lines as essential service providers. And actually one who's a very strong Dhamma practitioner, and she is coping really well with making life and death decisions on a daily basis all day long. And the three jewels are really helping her. So yeah, so I don't have anything else to say except this is absolutely without I can note when I'm in ignorance, and I can note when I'm free of that attachment to that view. And my responsiveness is just so much more effective when I'm not clinging to the view that this is what I am. So thank you.
Thank you for joining us this morning, Maura. Good to see you. Trevor, how are you? Trevor!
Yes, hello.
There you are. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the teaching. Thank you for all these wonderful comments. I appreciate how the teaching continues as we bring our impressions and difficulties. And I have to say, it was kind of a light bulb moment for me. Maybe just something, something obvious, perhaps, that I should have picked up. But when Tim was talking about ignorance leading to contact, I've been really struggling with, and I don't know, sometimes I think I'm getting a handle on dependent origination, and then sometimes I think I'm just starting from scratch in terms of understanding it. But when Tim was talking about that, I was just noticing the connection between the very same terms of the five aggregates occurring in those opening segments of dependent origination.
Yeah.
And so I was So I was starting to think of that chain independent origination as not just that, this attention or consciousness is rising, these perceptions are arising, feelings are rising, but this whole idea, as you've been talking about in so many different ways and places, John, that this ignorant view that we are those things. So really drawing that tight connection between dependent origination and the five aggregates. And if we believe we are these things, mental formations, rupa, body, perceptions, feeling, then we're believing as well that we are, ourself is making contact when in fact it's not.
Yep.
And
The important thing is that it is a mind rooted in ignorance that is making contact at that point. And so that corrupts the contextual experience.
Would you say more about that? And what do you see the mind rooted in ignorance making contact?
Well, if I have in my mind that only red apples are good and healthy, and someone gives me a green apple, I'm not going to eat it because of that belief, even though I might be hungry. But there's nothing wrong with the green apple, is it? Except that I believe that there's something wrong with it. I might starve because of that belief. Again, I'm using kind of an extreme example to make that point. It's our views it's our fabricated views that shape our reality. But of course, it has to be that way, isn't it? The way that I see things is the way that I'm going to experience things. And so if I'm taking anything personal, I've lost my mind because there's nothing personal. And any perceptual motivation that follows from that point has to be rooted in that ignorance and has to produce another moment rooted in ignorance. Of course, remember, Trevor and everyone else, while I'm living a human life with a mind rooted in ignorance, reality is occurring all the time. I just can't see it. I can't be in it because I don't have the wherewithal within me. I don't have the understanding to enter reality. I'm constantly insisting to not be in this reality. I'm constantly insisting to not see what's actually occurring. I want to see it from the way that I want to see it. Is that bringing some clarity there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's helpful.
And so, and then to get back to dependent origination, I think it's one of the most simple teachings that Buddha ever gave, but it's the one that is most corrupted because it's so close to us. In other words, in order to practice a true Dhamma authentic to what the Buddha taught, you have to practice dependent origination the way he taught it, because that's the foundation. That's what he awakened to. But if you want to practice something different, you have to corrupt dependent origination in some way, but usually it's in every way. And so we get back to where it begins. The Dhamma begins with an acknowledgement that it is from ignorance of Four Noble Truths as a requisite condition come fabrications, and then everything follows from that. And if we can address that one issue, which is the focus of the Dhamma, is recognizing and abandoning fabrications that lead to clinging to false views and worldly views, like the Thane was talking about. And the other component of that, Trevor and everyone, is that in order to really understand dependent origination, you can't read it. You have to develop it. It really is the only way. And then you can see within yourself that you are actually unraveling the links, the chain. When you recognize craving and clinging and abandon it in the moment, you're loosening the bonds to that chain. And when you do that enough, the chain breaks and it simply falls apart. And this is, so again, you're focused on where the Dhamma should be practiced. So very good. I'm glad you joined us today, Trevor.
I'm glad too. I just wanted to make one quick note. If just thinking ahead a little bit, I wanted to plant the idea as a possibility. If it does come to be that we can't be together for our retreat, I wondered if you might consider an online version.
Trevor, I was just thinking the same thing this morning. I really was. Let's see what happens. Yeah, I think we'll discuss that. And I did talk with, is Karen still with us? I can't see. I did speak with Karen yesterday, and there's no decision made, but I think with everything going on, especially it's in New York, that we're likely not going to have our spring retreat. But once it's official, I'll let everyone know. But we'll just move it to the fall. But I think it's a good idea. I think if we get to not being able to have our retreat in the spring, maybe we'll do something that weekend. We'll have an extended session, or maybe we'll do something. I think it's a great idea.
Okay, thanks, John.
Thank you. Anthony, how are you?
Oh, good, John. Thanks so much for today's talk. You said two things that really resonated with me, that, it's the perceptual part of this that matters, like people and situations and events. They're not by nature happy, sad, good, or bad. It's our perception of it. And the other thing you said that I really hit me is that we tend to focus on what we lack. I actually even wrote that down when you said it, because it's so true. It's like people chase after money thinking that's going to bring happiness, and it never does. And then, like, more recently, what we're seeing is people going to supermarkets and hoarding things, and they're running out of toilet paper, and nobody's ever said they're going to close all the supermarkets. They're doing it out of fear. And when you're fearful, you do the only thing you can to find control, which is to buy up everything on the store shelves. And what they're not realizing it is the only control you can have is to go within and find that space that Sarah and other people have talked about, because that's where the true liberation lies. That's where you can choose how you can respond, and not be a victim of the reaction to a bad situation. And I think that this is where the Dharma is so helpful, because it tells us that we're formless and timeless. And particularly when you couple that with a gratitude practice or loving kindness practice, where you're not focusing on what you lack, you're actually focusing on what's good about yourself and human nature. And so I found a lot of value in today, and I thank you for bringing it forward to us.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. You just to bring up a point of clarity for people that might be confused about the use of the word formless. I know you're not misusing it. What the Buddha is referring to in the formless state doesn't mean that we should strive for some understanding of being without form. That's not what formlessness means. It means that we don't attach ourselves to the form. The form is still part of that the six property person in the five clinging aggregates, or the five aggregates. But that's just a point of clarity. We're human beings. That's the Buddha awakened to this ridiculously profound notion that, guess what? As human beings, we're human beings. And guess what? We can't be anything more than that. But all of that makes sense when you have the right perspective, does it? How could I be more than what I am? But I also can't be less. And it's by that belief that there's something lacking that has us buying 6,000 rolls of toilet paper because everything's happening to me. What happens if I don't have I don't get too gross, but at the point of necessity, I might not have it. Well, what could be more self-centered than that? And it drives you to make really foolish decisions. The Dhamma allows you to get to get 6 rolls, and that's enough for today. Thank you, Anthony. Lorna, good to see you.
Hi, good to be with everybody this morning. What crossed my mind looking at the 5 Clinging-Aggregates this morning is how wise the Buddha was. Yeah. Because if the 5 Clinging-Aggregates are the problem, which I think you could describe them that way. Yes. Why or how did the Buddha get to the point of you need to focus on your breath to break down the 5 Clinging-Aggregates? Meaning, if the 5 Clinging-Aggregates are the problem, why don't we focus on the 5 Clinging-Aggregates directly and break them down? But when you meditate, you can see that if you're looking at the 5 Clinging-Aggregates, you're actually maintaining the 5 Clinging-Aggregates by thinking about the 5. So you get in that circle. And the Buddha was so wonderfully smart to realize to break the 5 Clinging-Aggregates down, you need to focus on your breath. Yeah. So hang on. So that got me thinking about when the Buddha was a little boy. He got in a bit of I don't know, he got in a bit of predicament. Anyway, he sort of went, sat under a tree somewhere and thought about,
5 years old.
I'm just going to sit and think about my breath. And when he did that, he realized that his mind sort of relaxed and cleared and settled him down and all that sort of stuff. So really, it's just kind of dawned on me this morning that how very, very, very fortunate we are that that incident happened when he was a little boy. Because if he hadn't have had that experience to fall back on, if it had worked out that the 5 clinging aggregates are the problem and then mentally worked on the 5 clinging aggregates, nothing of this would have, the Buddha teachings wouldn't have come about the way they have come about. He needed that personal experience when he was a little boy for him to fall back on, for him to see. You know where I'm going with this, don't you?
Yeah.
I think I've explained it, but it's how fortunate that happened when he was a little boy and he remembered it.
Yeah. Thank you, Lauren. I mean, that's, you hear me say all the time. The most fortunate thing that's ever happened to me is that I was fortunate enough to find these teachings in their purest form, and that they work, that I have a mind that can actually apply myself to it. And here they are, 2,600 years later. A human being figured this out. And you're describing how did he do it. We have the Nagara Sutta. When I finally read this Nagara Sutta, I think out of all the fabricated Buddhist dharmas that are out there, the one that I never ever heard reference was the Nagara Sutta, which in proper context is nearly as important as dependent origination and the Four Noble Truths, because it describes what you just talked about, the Buddha getting stuck in his own feedback loop of self-referential views confined by his own ignorance. But he describes how he came through that. And meditation and 7 other factors is the key to recognizing and abandoning all those fabricated views. I'm glad you joined us this morning.
Thank you.
Jen, how are you? Hello, Jen.
John, hi everybody.
There you are.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
So in the Khanda Sutta, this is a great distinction between an aggregate and a clinging aggregate.
Yep.
And helpful in understanding what a human being is and what they are not. And I just, he makes the distinction between each individual aggregate and then explains it exactly the same way and just adds the phrase, is clingable,
Yep.
clingable, offers sustenance, and is accompanied with mental fabrication. So if we experience a feeling, for example, or we notice a form, or we notice a perception or a fabrication or an overall state of mind, just to use the feeling aggregate, it just kind of brings you back to what are we holding in mind. If you are experiencing a feeling and you are holding in mind that it is arising and passing away on its own, then you are not suffering. But if you are holding in mind that this is my feeling, it is just that subtle difference will lead to fermentations,
Yep.
which feeds anatta, and it perpetuates that feeling and using that feeling to define our situation, which of course right now I think for a lot of people is fear. So I have to get away from this fear. I have to do something about this fear. I have to, define it and justify it and share it with others and get other people afraid. And, that is going to lead to more suffering. But if we can just, and what Mara was saying, I just love the way she said that, it's a roadmap. If you can just watch that feeling arise and pass away and just stay with it, and allow it to move through you, then you are not going to lose your mind over it.
Yeah. Well said, teacher. That really is, again, the essence of the Dhamma. But every one of you is referencing that, your profound understanding of what the Dhamma is and how to apply it in a practical way. It's just beautiful, Jen. Thank you. Ram, how are you? Hey, Ram. You want me to unmute your mic? I will. You can't say yes, so I will.
Unmute now.
There you are. How are you, Ram?
Oh, I'm good. Sitting in the rain here. Yes, the more you deal with the dependent origination and the five clinging aggregates, the easier it is to navigate in there and to apply it. I'm just, every time I go through the book again, every time I read a sutta about it, it just makes it a little bit easier because it can look daunting in the beginning, that it's such a mass of this leads to that. But the constant practice in it makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
You said something earlier that the view of self is the last thing that you have to let go of, that before awakening. And I just flashed on Ananda, the Buddha's cousin, and he had such a hard time making that last jump. And I realized the man spent, the major part of his life defining himself as, I am the Buddha's caretaker. I am keeping this man alive. And I am the keeper of the Dhamma as well. And so here he is, Buddha's dead, body's been burned, and he now has to confront that view of self. I am the Buddha's caretaker. And finally manages that, and that allows him to also give up the idea that he is the keeper of the Dhamma.
Yes.
If they wouldn't even let him into the meeting, they wouldn't let him in, and he realized that he had to give up that idea too, that he was the keeper of the Dhamma.
Yeah.
Couldn't do it.
That was his self-referent. That was his most powerful, or the self-referential view that he was clinging to the most.
Yeah.
Constantly reinforced by his own views every day of being that.
Yeah. Yeah. And which would make him so effective as the Buddha's caretaker and as the keeper of the Dhamma, that he had that clinging. So, but then, clinging at the end.
Ram, it's such a good example of a fabrication that is in fact a reality, because he was in fact the keeper of the Dhamma, but it was his view that that's what he was that was fabricated, even though the underlying experience or event was just that. But he was too strongly identified with it. That's what kept him from awakening until, a short time after the Buddha's passing. But it makes such an important point.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ram. See you soon. Hello, Michael.
Yeah.
Michael and Julia. Michael? Hello, Michael.
Hi, John.
There you are.
Good God. Sorry. Actually, Julia had to go upstairs. She's not feeling well. So.
Oh, geez.
So let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Being that she's not here, do I get her 3 minutes?
Sure.
If I get her 3 minutes.
Wait, no, that's not. That can't be right. No, you can't use. You can only have your own 3 minutes.
Oh, okay, because I was thinking if I put my 3 minutes with her 3 minutes, I get 33 minutes. Okay, I'll stop wasting everyone's time here. A lot of good things have been said. I just love listening to everyone, and especially when it comes to five clinging aggregates and the five aggregates, okay? And obviously the five aggregates comprise what we are. But the clinging aggregates are based in, from an ignorant point of view. So as I was going over the aggregates, Julie and I were the past couple of days, I went back to, read over again the Eightfold Path, and how the perspective of right view changes so many things. I think we kind of really get locked into reading dependent origination, and as we lead dependent, is that a smoke detector or something? I think as we look at things from right view, it clears up a lot of things, especially when it comes to dependent origination. You take out ignorance, that just drops the whole chain, and we don't. We break that cycle of dependent origination. Also, it does the same for the aggregates. When we remove ignorance and wrong view, then we again understand the aggregates for what they are. Again, I think also, and recognizing what anatta is, what the ego self is, that too clears up a lot of things. So recognize when your ego is chiming in each and every time, and that also gives us the perspective of right view, when we could recognize the ego and fend it off. Also, so that realization of what anatta is I think a very important factor going on here. Again, I'll go back to the Eightfold Path, fully integrated, right view, right intention, right effort, right mindfulness, and knowing when to employ the Eightfold Path, and being mindful of the effort that we when it comes to our speech, actions, and livelihood. Again, like, once we're mindful and we follow the Eightfold Path as it was meant to be followed, okay? Once we conquer that, so to say, or integrate it fully, that too leads to purity of mind. Our mind becomes pure when we're thinking, from the right perspective, and again, that's refined mindfulness. We're going to, the mind becomes purified, because again, we don't allow distractions to confuse us or to take us off that path. Distractions are the main cause of pain and suffering, and anything that causes distraction in our minds is anatta, is the not self. Okay, so recognizing the ego in that manner as anything that distracts the mind and that entangles us is also again is the ego self. So I just want to go with that whole idea, looking at things from right view, familiarization, a deep understanding of the Eightfold Path helps us understand, or helps me anyhow understand, everything else that flows from there.
Well said, my friend.
No, thank you.
Hello, Becky. How are you?
Mike.
Hey, Becky.
Okay, here I am.
There you are.
I'm very good. Thank you, John. Thank you for this teaching. I enjoyed this sutta, and I wrote something down, so I'll just read what I wrote and keep things brief. The five aggregates: form, feelings, perceptions, mental fabrications, and consciousness are the phenomenon that define humanness. When ignorance creeps in and we fail to see these aggregates with right view, they become clingable distractions which pull us out of ourselves. These five aggregates are the essence of impermanence. When we want the impermanent to be any different than it is right now, we are taking impermanence personally. we are clinging to what we hope to be, or felt, or hope to feel, or had, or want, or seen, or hope to see. All this distraction keeps us from seeing through to the truth and from being present for our life as it unfolds.
Beautifully said, Becky. Again, we're all describing the Dhamma in its most practical and authentic way. Just remarkable. Is there anyone that I missed? Anyone that didn't get a chance? No? Okay. You'll read the chapter 9 on karma and rebirth for next week's class. We'll have 2 classes on karma and rebirth. We mentioned, a few of you mentioned the Kanda Sutta that was linked in the email. I am going to teach that sutta shortly after we finish this Dhamma study, and a few other new suttas that relate very well to the course. We'll get to as soon as we finish the course. I think that's it. I'm going to end. There's something else I wanted to talk about, but I can't remember it. Not important. I'm going to end the recording, but I'll keep the meeting room open for, what should we call it? Is that recording end? End recording? Okay, stop cloud recording. Yes.